Welcome to Beautiful Guitars. I'm Chris. Behind the camera is Matt, as always, and it's another episode of the 3,000-year-old guitar build series. Today, we're going to install the frets on this bad boy. Before we get into the how-to on that, I do want to fulfill the promise from the last episode, and that is to show you guys how the inlay came out. So we can get Matt to zoom in there. Ooh. Looks super, super nice. Of course, obviously, when it's got finish on it, all of this is going to get so much richer in color as well.
Do you want to grab some naphtha?
Yeah, let's show them. Let's show the folks. Let's show the folks.
This is the cheapest thrill that we have as a loop here.
Exactly. This is what she's going to look like a little bit more under some finish.
Ooh.
Right? Yeah, that was worth it. That was worth the effort.
Yeah, here. Ooh, yeah.
So really happy with how that came out. And the other thing that you guys did not get to see was the fret markers that would be fully inlaid and got that all leveled out, and it looks super, super good. Really happy with it. So that leaves us to the step that we're on here, which is putting in the frets. We have laid out kind of in front of me here all of the different tools that we use to do a fret install on a guitar. Remember, folks, there are probably multiple dozens of ways that you can install frets on a guitar. Inevitably, no matter what I do, there's going to be people who tell me that I'm doing it wrong, and if I watch other people install frets, they'd be like, well, that's not the best way to do it. But remember, what matters is that if you're going to learn how to build guitars and install frets, obviously, that you just need to come up with a system that's repeatable for you. That's what matters. And that's like, broadly speaking, for every step of the guitar build. There's not like a way to do it. And I know that I've talked about that a lot, but frets, very much so. It's just whatever tools you have on hand, and how can you do it in a repetitive and predictable way. So for me, this is what I've got. We're going to put links to all of the tools that we use here. I think we're going to throw some links into some of the tools that you don't see here that are for people who don't maybe have as much equipment as I do. But I just kind of wanted to get that out of the way on the front end. But with that, I guess we'll get going on the process.
Hey, Chris, what's that?
Oh, yes. A little self-shameless plug here. This is our fret caddy that Matt and I make and we sell on the website. We have a link down below, and you're actually going to get to see it a lot in this episode, but this is going to hold all of our frets that we're going to cut as we install them. We also have a nice magnetic tray here and a spot for our bridge pins to go. These are super handy for folks who do repair work or guitar building. Sits on your workbench and kind of, it's a luthier's buddy.
Really?
No, you hate it and I love it, so stay in it.
Courtney, sorry, we went for maximum cheese there. Yeah.
With a little sparkle.
Commercial con queso.
Exactly. Okay, the first thing that we did before we even kind of really got going on the fret job was I took my Dremel tool and a small little bit that's designed specifically for this, and we actually cleaned out all of the fret slots on the fretboard. I think it's a step that a lot of people forget a lot of the times, but you can get glue down inside there. After you radius the fretboard, a lot of the times the fret slot is actually not consistently deep across the whole thing. So by doing that, what it does is it ensures that our fret slot is deep enough across the entire fretboard so that when we go to press these frets in, that they actually seat all the way. So I definitely recommend that you do that. I use the Dremel tool. There are also little tiny saws that are designed to do that. So if you don't have a Dremel tool and you need to use one of the small saws, we'll have a link to that down below as well. The other thing that I do that I learned years ago just makes this job a lot easier is after I clean out those fret slots is I took this over to the buffer and I went ahead and I sanded this whole thing down to 800 grit and then I buffed it all out so it's got this really nice glossy shine to it. So what that's going to do is allow us to be able to remove any sort of glue squeeze out that we get a whole lot easier. Plus you're going to have to polish the fretboard in the end anyway, so that just go ahead and knock that out now before you put the frets on. It's going to make the job a lot easier. So with that, let's talk about frets and fret wire. There are so many different types of fret wire out there. What we're going to be using in this episode and what I use on all of my acoustic guitars is the EVO Gold fret wire. We used to use the stuff from LMI that came pre-coiled up, but we obviously no longer do that, and we're using all the StewMac stuff now. So this is the StewMac Gold fret wire. I guess that's the part number there, the 150G. Wide and highest. So it's a slightly wider fret wire, but it's the tallest fret wire that they make. And I really like using it on the guitars because it gives you a lot of extra material that you can remove when you're doing the fret leveling step. So we pull out 4 sticks, and obviously these sticks are straight as an arrow, well, kind of straight as an arrow. And what we need to do is actually apply a radius to them so that they match the radius that is on the fretboard. And in our case, we have a 16-inch radius on our acoustic fretboards. So we're going to use a fret bending tool. We just happen to have this one right here, and we are going to put it in a vise, and we're going to run it through there and create ourselves these little coils. what I like to do is make the coil a tighter radius than the radius on the fretboard. It makes it so that the ends of the fret have a tendency to want to really stay seated on the fretboards. Okay, we got our fret wire bent up, looks really good. I like to do 3 sticks. It's like 2.1 sticks that you need in order to do a whole fretboard, but so I always bend up an extra one. We usually have some extra bent ones going around somewhere, but you can see that my radius, let's see if we can get it on camera, right?
Yeah.
If I hide my eyes.
Yeah. It's there.
But yeah, so it's a steeper radius or a tighter radius than the fretboard itself, and you'll see once we start pressing these in how that helps me out. So what we need to do now is go ahead and cut them to length. So what I'm going to do is just grab some fret cutters here. I've got these cool ones here. Once again, StuMac. These are super great. I have several pairs of these. You can just use regular wire cutters if you want. The difference between these and wire cutters is that these cut super flush. They don't have a whole lot of space in there for you to get this weird, like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like where it squeezes the metal and kind of blows it all out. It's just these give you a much cleaner cut so that you don't have to do a lot more cleaning on the other end of it. So this is pretty straightforward. The thing that I was going to say is that the very first like inch of the fret wire tends to still be straight. So a lot of the times I go ahead and I just cut off that first like inch of the fret wire so that I'm only working with the radius stuff. But how I do this, just for this initial step, it just kind of, I consider this kind of prep work, right? As I'll set this on here on the first fret, I probably go, you know, a millimeter, a 1/16 of an inch past the end of the fret, and then I just kind of push this up flush against the fretboard, and I give it a nip. You can see how we get a really nice, clean, fairly clean cut on the end of that. And then we come over here and we put it in our fret caddy. And then we just move on down to the next one and we just keep it going. And you can see how having a fret caddy is really nice to keep you organized so that you know what you're doing.
Fun fact, did you know that the phrase to fret comes from whenever you have a fret caddy full of frets and then it falls on the floor and they all get lost? Yeah. That is where it came from.
That's where you don't fret it.
Don't fact check me. You heard it on the internet, so it must be true.
That's right. All right, so I got almost my last fret cut, and you can see this is what's left over, and I've got to get this last fret done, and it's just not quite enough. So I've got to move on to this last piece of fret wire that I bent up. So maybe StuMac could just make these like an inch longer. You know what it is? It's because I cut off that flat section. That's what it is.
Maybe.
If I didn't do that.
Yeah. Someone somewhere did do something really smart, and then you do something dumb,
That's right.
and then you're like, well, they should really be smart about
this. That's right. Okay, so now we have all of our frets cut. So I'm going to take a moment to just talk about the 2 different types of fret jobs that you're going to do. You'll notice on this guitar, we have a bound fretboard, and I'm going to dumb it down for just a second, but just so you guys know, the binding is the piece of wood that goes around the perimeter of the guitar. So that's what a bound fretboard means versus just an unbound fretboard, which would mean there's no wood that wraps around the whole thing. The big distinction when it comes to doing fret work between those two is that on a bound fretboard, the fret slot does not cut into the binding. So you have this captured slot between the 2 pieces of binding. But if you don't have a bound fretboard, it's a lot easier because what you can do is, when you talk about cutting your fret length, you can just cut it super proud. You can cut it a 1/4 inch, you can cut it 2 inches extra long if you want to, because the fret's just gonna go in, you're gonna smash it in there, and then you can cut it off after you've installed them. But with bound,
it's just wasteful.
yeah. But with a bound fretboard, what you need to do is you need to cut your frets like we've shown here, very, very close to their full length. Let's see if Matt can show that. We're just about to our full length, right? But what we need to do is we need to cut a notch into that fret tang so that it sits up and over the piece of binding. So how do we go about doing that? There's several different tools that you can use. For years I used a little fret nipper that StuMac used to sell, but they've switched over to this deluxe one, which is really, really nice because it's got different stops on it so that I can adjust the amount of ledge that we put on it. So we're going to use that. When I very first started doing frets on bound guitars, I actually just did the whole process with a file. And it did not have any sort of nipping tool whatsoever. But I'll show you how we go about doing this, getting our frets prepped for press. So what we do is I've set this gauge here, this little stop piece here. It can go left or it can go right, and then this piece right here determines how much that ledge is. So just stay right there, Matt, and I'll show you. We'll put our fret wire in here, and we just go, and it pops through. So see, we've got our nice ledge there. And then we'll flip it around, and we'll do the same thing. And then what I like to do at that point is we've got, I know I'm texting Matt here to go back and forth.
Sorry.
Okay, you can see on this one how we've done both of the nips on both sides. So it's got this piece of tang that goes between the two. So what I like to do now is after I've done that is I'll go through and I'm going to check and make sure that my tang is the width of my slot. And that's pretty much perfect right there. It actually could probably come in just a little bit more, but I think it's going to be okay. If it's too tight, what'll happen when you go to press your frets in, it can actually push out the binding. So you do want to take the time and get that right now. So what I'll do is I'll go through the rest of my, my 21 frets, do this on all of them, and then there's one more step that I need to do to these frets before we can actually get to pressing them in. So let me go ahead and knock these out. Okay, so we've got all the initial nips done on the fret wire, and it's looking pretty good, but you can't just press the frets in at this point. Unfortunately, I don't know that it's possible to make a tool that'll do it perfectly, but what we end up with is, let me find something I can point with here. So what we end up with is just a little itty bitty bit of fret wire tang still left over here. So what I like to do is I've actually sanded a or filed in a very tiny little spot into my workbench. I just use one of these triangle files, and I just made myself a nice little spot for my fret wire to sit inside of right here. And then what I like to do, pop all my out divisors, and I come through, I set that in that little slot, and I'm just going to take it, my file, and we're just going to knock off that little bit of tang that's left over and get it perfect. It usually takes me a few seconds to get the first one just to get a rhythm down. I'm giving Matt a challenge today with all the close-ups, but we've got that really smooth. You don't want to remove any actual material off the bottom of the fret wire or the fret itself, because otherwise you're going to end up with a gap. So there's definitely a little bit of a skill required to get this right. Maybe you have just a couple of frets that you consider throwaway frets just to get a sense of how it feels. You don't have to do this step, but if you don't want a lot of fret sprout, then you definitely should do it. I always am like, ugh, I've got to do this next step, but you just kind of get yourself comfortable, go through all of the frets, and then you're finally ready to press them in. So we'll do that. We'll file all these down and move on. So this is my least favorite part of doing a fret job. All right, we've got all of our frets prepped, and at this point, now that we've taken the file and we've gotten them looking really good, we are ready to press these in. But before we move over to the drill press, which is how I'm going to be putting these frets in, using it as an arbor, I just wanted to take a split second to cover some of the other methods. The most popular and the most analog way that most people get into doing fret work is just with a classic hammer. Makes a lot of sense. You can use just a claw hammer if you want, but there's specific hammers that places like StewMac and other luthier supply websites sell that are really good for hammering frets. So check those out if you don't want to spend all the money on a drill press.
What are the downsides of the hammer?
Yeah, I'd say that the downsides to a hammer versus some sort of press is that it's really easy to kind of chase the fret going in. You might hammer on one side of the fret and then the other side pops out, and then you'll hammer in on this side of the fret and then it pops out. It's also just a lot of trauma that you're putting on the neck of the guitar. It's really easy to accidentally cause a crack in it. It can just be, it's a lot to think about. You don't want to beat the crap out of something that you're getting ready to turn into a guitar. And I used hammers for a long time, probably for my first 10 or so guitars, and then I switched over to an arbor press, and I was like, I'm never going back. And with that, there are two other ways that you can do this if you don't want to use your drill press as an arbor. You can go out and buy an actual arbor press, which you can get through StewMac. You can get them through your local hardware stores a lot of the times. Those work really good. And then the other option is there are many different types of vice grip type mechanisms that we'll put links to down below that allow you to kind of have an arbor without having an arbor and press each fret on individually. But if you have a drill press, which a lot of people who are into woodworking will have a drill press, you can use it as an arbor press as well. And if you're going to do that, you're going to use these different types of cauls. And what happens with these is you can actually switch out this lower half, this piece of brass, to different radiuses, and that radius on there is going to match the radius on your fretboard. And you just put this inside the chuck on the drill press, and we're going to treat it just like an arbor. And these are not that expensive, and it just takes all of the stress out of it. And the other thing is that when you press them in with an arbor like this, they're a lot more even. So the process of leveling all of your frets is a lot easier. I do want to take just a second on that note. This video is not going to include dressing the frets. We're going to do that after we attach the neck to the guitar. So this is just going to be a fret pressing video. But I'm always thinking about that step. So anything that I can do to mitigate a lot of work on the backside when I go to level the frets, I'm super into it. So that's what we're going to do. But I just wanted to make sure that we took some time to mention that there are a lot of different ways that you can install frets. If you want to be as safe as possible, do some sort of press. If you're just trying to get a foot in the door and get into installing frets, then get yourself a nice hammer. Get a hammer that's meant for installing frets, because it's going to prevent a lot of damage to the fret and damage to the guitar neck as well. But with that, I think we'll head over to the drill press and I'll show you how I go about installing these things. All right, we're over at the drill press. So I wanted to show you guys kind of what I've got going on over here. We've got the fret pressing caul here inside the chuck, and it's dialed in really nicely with the right size, which is a 16-inch radius for this guitar. And then we have this neck cradle that we're setting the guitar on. You're gonna need some sort of cradle. A lot of different companies make cradles that work really well. It depends if you're doing acoustics versus electrics. There's different advantages to different types of cradles, but for fret pressing, I will tell you that the one that StewMac makes that's like round on the bottom, it doesn't work good for this sort of thing, just because it wants to roll so much. So get yourself something that does have a flat bottom. We've got our patent pending driftwood fret caddy over here. Well, all of our frets, they're ready to go. We've got them all fully prepped. And I've got a medium viscosity super glue with a whip tip on it. That's pretty much everything you need to do this job. For a long time, I actually didn't glue my frets in. I just pressed them in. I don't know why I kind of landed on that, but eventually I started to have enough guitars with some fret sprout issues that I started using it, and I'm way happier for it. So what I like to do is to take a medium viscosity super glue with the whip tip. I kind of pinch the tip of it, and it allows me to get the super glue just down inside that gap where the fret's going to go. Don't go super heavy with it, because I don't want a bunch of squeeze out. If I get squeezed out, I'm going to have super glue all over the fretboard, and it's going to be a giant, enormous mess. But you'll also remember that I polished the fretboard. The reason why I polished the fretboard, so that if I do get some glue squeeze out on here, I let it dry and it just pops right off with the lightest little touch of a chisel. So yes, the only other thing I need to do is get a little paper towel just in case I do have some whoopsie daisies. So let me grab that real quick. Okay, we got the paper towel. Let us begin. We got the one camera, so Matt's not going to be operating here to give you guys super good close-ups. But what I like to do is, like I said, I'm going to go down the center here, but I take the main place where I'm looking is getting just a tiny, tiny, tiny little dot right where the overhang of the fret's going to go, right where this tang overlap is. So I like to put it just on the binding, just a little touch. And so I've got those two little dots on, and now I'm going to get my glue down inside the fret slot here. Like I said, it's just a very little bit. We're not going nuts. Then I'm going to take my fret that I've got prepped. We're just going to very, very carefully set it in its slot, get it centered. We'll come over here and let's see. And now we're going to press. And that thing is fully in. We do have ourselves just a tiny little spot of some glue on there that came out. So what I like to do is I bend up the corner of my paper towel, and I always go off the fretboard. And it just comes right off just before it dries. And then if you do get some squeeze out and it dries, that's fine. You can chip it off, like I said, with a polished fretboard. I need to get a different accelerant. Hang on. Okay, the other thing that I like to use is this brush-on accelerant in this case. If you use the, if you use a classic like aerosolized accelerant, what happens is you'll start to get accelerant in the frets that you're about to do, and what'll happen is as you go to apply your super glue in the next fret, the super glue will cure so quick you don't have time to press the fret in. So what I use is this, the brush-on. And the other reason why I like to do it is because I can press down, hold down on it with my, my drill press, and then I can just wipe the accelerant right there and just hold it for a few seconds, and it'll cure up real quick, and it allows me to kind of have some control without getting accelerant all over the whole fretboard. But there you go. So that fret is fully pressed in. So at this point we just kind of rinse and repeat, and we can do that because we took our time to prep all of our frets and get them perfect before we got to this step. What I'd hate happening is not doing all the prep work on the frets, and then as I'm pressing them in, I'm having to modify the fret a little bit because it's like, oh, it doesn't quite fit this or that or that. When you took all the time to prep them like we did, now we can just smash them all in and we're going to be good to go. So I'm just going to work my way down the fretboard. If I find something interesting to say, I will say it. Another thing you can do is right before I go to press it in, once I know everything's ready to go, before it's pressed, I'll take that accelerant and I'll put it right there. And now we'll press down, and we'll hold it with some pressure. That way you've got accelerant down inside the tang. It just can help ensure that it's drying all the way. Oh, that's amazing. I don't know if I'm going to move my face out of the frame so that maybe the camera will focus well, but there's just a little bit of super glue squeeze out just right there on the edge of that fret. Like I said, totally fine. I'm going to let that stay. I'm not going to worry about it until we are completely done with pressing these in, and then we'll go back and we'll clean it off. Just makes, compartmentalize the amount of work that's required to get this done. I guess the most important part of the glue is, for a bound fretboard, is to make sure that that fret tang has got glue underneath it. That's the big thing that's going to keep you from having fret sprout issues, because obviously this sort of fret job is more prone to fret sprout than an unbound fretboard. So once again, get it all lined up, and boom and boom, and press and hold. Okay, so I want Matt to come in here with the camera and show you how much glue squeeze out I have. I'm going to be transparent with you guys. This is more glue squeeze out than I typically have, and I was just telling Matt, I was like, bro, the glue squeeze out so much. And
well, you clean it up. That's all that matters.
Clean it up, right? And I think that, like, going forward, I'm going to keep doing it this much because it's just like, it's really good insurance to make sure that these frets are not going anywhere. I use super glue. I also see guys, and I've never done it this way, but I see guys take wood glue, just your standard, tight bond, and they'll wipe it on the fretboard a little bit slightly watered down, and they'll press all their frets in, and apparently that cleans up really well. But let me show you how I do this. So I've got myself a nice sharp chisel. I like to take just a tiny little bit of, geez almighty, I like to take a little bit of some masking tape. We've got that thin line tape, and I'll put it on 1/2 of the chisel. What this does is it allows me to keep the other side of the chisel from gouging into my fretboard and putting marks all over it. So let's go with one of these heavy ones over here. They should, fingers crossed, pop right off because of our polished fretboard. Once I get it to, there we go, once I get it to break its seal, it should come pretty much right off, and of course not. But you can see it breaks flush off the fretboard really nicely, so you end up with almost no mark whatsoever. So we'll go back and do this with all the frets, clean them out, and then we'll probably end up doing one more polish on the fretboard altogether, just so that we can make sure that it's obviously perfect. We don't want to have any visible marks at all. Mm-hmm. You can see a little bit of the residuals from the accelerant that are on there if the light's hitting it correctly, but that's all stuff that'll come off. So I'll go through on all these frets, pull off the super glue, and then I'll show you what the next step is. All right, frets installed, looking good. As you can tell, they're a little proud, right? A little proud, sticking out a little far, and that's exactly what you want it to look like at this stage. So what we have left to do is, now that we've cleaned out all the glue squeeze out and everything, is to nip the ends of these and then to put a bevel on them. There's a whole world of different ways that you can dress your fret ends, but for me, I do the bevel end. Well, I'm doing bevel end on these. Sometimes I do ball ends on the frets, but that's not what this video is going to show off. So how do we clean off our fret ends? You can just grab yourselves, the automotive pair of wire cutters or whatever, and snip off on the ends of these, but wire cutters, just traditional wire cutters, do not give you a really nice flush cut, and that's where these fret nippers are really going to pay off. They work super, super good. They're basically almost completely flush here in the end, so you can see when you go to put them on something, you end up with a cut that's really, really nice. But what I like to do, just to further guarantee that we don't have these frets wanting to sprout out at all, is I use two hands. I put my nippers right up against the edge. I get ready to squeeze it, but I'm also pushing down with my thumb because I don't want to be pulling up at all with my fret nippers. I don't want to accidentally unseat the fret. That's just always in my mind from here on out. So what I'll do is I'll push down just a little bit and we'll nip it. And I just go down the whole fretboard and I go that way with it. But by pushing down, it just gives me a little bit of insurance. Okay, the fret ends have been nipped off, and you can see, I don't know how well you can see, but they're not completely flush, obviously. I can feel just the slightest little spots, and they look like crap. So what we need to do now is put a nice clean end on the end of them and put a bevel on them, and that's where one of these fret end tools works super good. You can do it with a file, but man, it's super easy to screw that up. It's really easy to mess up and gouge into the side of your fretboard. So get yourself one of these fret end dressing tools. Obviously, we've got a StewMac one here. These things are kind of all created equal. You can get some cheap ones off of eBay. You can get them off of Alibaba, all the good things. But you need to get yourself one of these for sure to do this job. And I'm going to move over to the vise, and you'll see how well and how quick they work. So we'll get this in here with the headstock, and what I like to do is to be standing kind of right here. These are designed to do a 45-degree bevel, and what you typically would do is you'd set this on the fretboard and you're going to run this way, and it's going to give you your bevel. That's all fine and dandy, but what I like to do first is make it a 90-degree as my first one. So what I can do is I'll sit on here and I'll get this knocked down. It typically takes more work down here towards the end of the fretboard because you have way more frets than you do down on that end, so it does take a little bit more attention on the end of the fretboard. You need to be very careful when you get down to here, at least on my guitar designs. When I'm doing the 90-degree one, the file does not get out of the way. What it can do is it can bang in to the end of your headstock and cause a giant gouge right here. So you're going to want to make sure I stop. Once I'm on the 45, it clears it, so it's not a big deal. But for the 90, you want to be aware of that. Okay, so right there, that's exactly what I wanted to show you. That's the first fret that's pretty much perfect. You can see how we've got just a flat spot on the neck, and the fret is flush with it. So that's what kind of where I'm going to go across this whole fretboard. We just want to just nick the end of the fretboard. Okay, so at this point, everything feels really nice. I can run my hand across here and I don't feel any sort of burrs or anything like that. So what I can do at this point is I'm going to switch over to the 45. So now the bottom of this phenolic is going to ride on the top of the frets. And I'm just going to press it up against here. It's very easy once you do this 45 to want it to slip off and go and tear up all your frets. You've done that before, Matt?
So many times.
Exactly.
It's like it's not the end of the world, but it does guarantee
so
it does add another 30 or 45 minutes to a job that really shouldn't take that long.
Yeah. So I try to be mindful of the feeling of what this feels like when it wants to fall off. So we'll just hit this on here.
Despair? You mean that's the feeling? The feeling of it trying to fall. Sadness.
Exactly. So now what I'm paying attention to is we're going to get that 45 to creep all the way down to just about the very tip of the fret. That's where we're taking that down to. It can be harder down here because you've got some flex on the fingerboard extension, and once again, like I said, you've got double the amount of frets per inch as you do over here, so it just takes a little bit more work. I typically rest my hand here to press against this side of the fretboard to keep it from bowing. So that looks pretty stinking good. I'm going to need to do the same thing, obviously, to the other side. But before I do that, what I wanted to do was kind of show you something that I do in addition to this. So let me grab just some sandpaper real quick. Okay, so the last thing that I like to do before I flip it over and do the other side is I got some 220 here. And I'm going to take it, and we're going to kind of come all the way over here down onto the wood. And I'm just going to slowly bring this, I'm going to start rolling my sandpaper this way. And you can hear just a little bit of wood touching, and then I'm actually going to come and do the bevel with some sandpaper. So I'm not just fully relying on the file to do all of the work. I like to come in and do just this. There's a little bit of rolled edge, kind of a la an electric guitar. Acoustic guitars typically don't have rolled fretboard ends, but since we started building the electrics, it's something that I've learned really does add quite a bit of feel to the guitar. The other thing that it does using the sandpaper is that it can get rid of just the tiniest little bit of metal shavings that you might get on the end of the fretboard there. And we'll do that across both sides of the guitar. So I just need to spin this over and do the other side. And we'll be just about there. Okay, both sides are beveled and super smooth. They feel really, really nice. Obviously, there's just a touch of burring on here from the 220. But I wanted to take a moment to kind of address the elephant in the room, which is I'm going to say that I'm done with my frets for right now. But obviously, we still have a lot of fret work to do. I would say that at this point, the frets are installed, a la the title of the video. We're just doing a video about installing frets. Because what I like to do, and this is just me, I like to not do my fret crowning and my leveling until after the neck is actually glued to the guitar. You'll have some people that will go ahead and do a lot of that work right now before it even goes in the paint booth. You know, you'll mask all this off and do all your fret crowning, which we will cover in another video. But my thought process on that is the fact that what always ends up happening is you're going to glue this fingerboard extension onto the guitar. You're going to put a water-based glue inside of here, and you inevitably have either the fingerboard extension going down or going up just a very kiss of a little bit. And so you spend all that time leveling the frets now, but it won't matter once you glue it onto the guitar, so you might as well wait until afterwards. It's a little bit more precarious because you obviously have to worry about messing up the finish on the guitar. If you're doing like if you're building a guitar with an ambitious neck joint, like a Taylor style neck joint where you're going to do the bolts over here, and you have a big chunk of wood down here, you could probably go ahead and do your fret level now. If you're building an electric guitar that does not have a thin fingerboard extension on it, you can go ahead and do your fret leveling now. In fact, that's how Matt and I do our stuff. We do our fret level before they go in the paint booth. But I just wanted to say that to you guys, and that includes my fret ends. My fret ends right now are just sanded with a 220, but what's going to happen is we're going to get this thing prepped in the next episode for the paint booth. We're going to start spraying lacquer on this thing, and it's going to get all sealed up. What I do during the buffing process of the finish is I'm actually going to go through, and the ends of these frets are going to get taken all the way to 1000 grit and buffed out along with recrowning all of our frets, and it's going to be absolutely awesome. I say that because the guitar neck does, at least to my eyes at this point, look a little ragged, but that's just kind of how it tends to look before the next step, which will be getting it over onto the workbench, taking our time, and really getting all of the woodwork on this absolutely perfect before we get it in the booth. So I hope that my little video here to show you guys how I install frets helps you guys out at home. Remember, this is one of those steps on a guitar that there's so many different ways that you can go about doing it. So we're gonna have links not only to all of the tools that we used in this video, but to tools that we didn't even use in this video. Remember, I know that we push a lot of the StewMac tools, but those guys do a whole lot to support Matt and I here on this channel. And you guys can also support us by buying tools using those links that we have down below, because it does help keep the lights on here on the home front. So yeah, next episode, we're gonna be getting this thing ready for the paint booth, and I'm excited about it. So we'll see you in the next one.